Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 6. I am here to talk a little bit about how to write an introduction. So I'm going to go over piece by piece the elements that are in an introduction and how it's all aligned with the research question. Give you some advice on methods and lit review and a little bit of advice on data collection. All right, so I want to start right off with the example introduction. This is Heather Ferguson's dissertation proposal. So it's in a little bit greater development than you would be right now, but it does have all the correct sections. It's all fairly well aligned with the research question. So I thought it would be a really good example for you. So here at the top, we see the research question. How do site administration and high school special education teachers work collectively to influence learning for students with disabilities in a charter school setting? So you can see there's actually many segments to this research question. This is a very dense research question, right? We've got people, site administration and high school special education teachers. We've got what they're doing. They're working collectively to influence student learning. And then we've got the folks who are doing the learning, which is the students with disabilities, and we have the setting, a charter school setting. So all of those things are over here on the side, color-coded, so you can follow along. All right, so in her introductory paragraph, it's actually a little bit like a problem statement, so there might be a little bit of repetition in here. But essentially you can see where she starts very broad at the very beginning. Intended to increase access to a good education, charter schools appear to fail one of the country's most marginalized groups of students, students with disabilities. Charter schools struggle to provide appropriate academic programs and support systems for students with learning disabilities so that they can be academically successful. So you can see she started with a very broad statement. She introduced the setting, which is charter schools, and she introduced the main group of students, students with disabilities. Then she unpacked it a little bit, just provided a little bit of detail that charter schools struggle to provide appropriate academic programs and support systems, which is related to learning, and then that they can be academically successful. So then she provides a consequence, right? So this is kind of the very big picture problem, and the consequence is right here. As a result, students with disabilities are estranged in an educational setting that was established to improve quality of learning. And when students do not receive quality special ed, they may not develop the appropriate academic self-awareness and advocacy. So big picture of the problem, consequence of that big picture. You notice she has not yet introduced site administrators and high school special ed teachers working collectively, right? So she's introduced 3 of her topics in her lit review question, and I'm sorry, in her research question, but not yet into the final 2. Now, before she reaches the end of this paragraph, she needs to introduce site administration and high school education teachers working collectively. All right, so you can see that here. She transitions. As the charter school network is expanding, it's imperative to better understand why there's this lack of opportunities. Then she says, literature states that teacher-administrator relationships are vital to improve learning in schools. So now she's transitioning to introduce the other 2 topics, which is that site and admins and teachers need to work collectively, okay? And then she brings it back to eventually charter schools and special education students. So she gives a little bit of detail about the role of administrators here and about the role of teachers. You know, admins make important decisions, special education teachers work closely with the students. So we've gone back to special ed students here. And then she talks about the importance of the relationship here, and then comes back to her research question, how these 2 stakeholders work collaboratively to impact learning conditions for students with disabilities. This is where she does just a really quick introduction of her research problem or purpose. Now then, underneath, she goes on to make an argument about the significance of the research. So you can see where in her introductory paragraph, she actually lays out the entire introduction in summary format, right? The problem of practice broad, the problem of practice narrower, the research problem or purpose, and the significance of the research, right? So then she gets into the background of the problem. I'm just going to talk about it in general. In her first section, she talks about the context of charter schools. So again, broad, starting with the context. In her next section, she talks about charter schools and disability. So she's saying, okay, now what is it, how is it that charter schools treat students with disability? In the final section, she talks about the need for collaboration between admins and teachers. So you can see where she's hitting all of these points in the background also. Okay, now in her statement of the problem, which is, it's a little bit repetitive to the introduction, but she really starts to unpack that middle ground of what's the exact problem. She spends some time talking about charter schools here. And then she gets into, again, this relationship. So in this section here, she's talking about the relationship between admins and the special ed teachers and how it's super important, right? She's making this argument. And then finally, once again, she gets into the research problem and the significance of the research and the rest of it, okay? Now, in her section called The Significance of the Study, this is where she really expands on that significance. What is this going to do for people who are trying to make a difference out in the schools? So I'll discuss the implications, the impact, the conditions for learning of students in charter setting. So how much detail can you introduce regarding what this research could do for people, all right? And then finally, she has a paragraph talking about the rest of the paper. You don't need to have this in your pilot study introduction, but you need to have it in your introduction of your qualifying exam. So you could do that, you could add it. Same with the definition of terms. You definitely do not need it for your pilot study, but you will need it for your dissertation proposal eventually. So if you want to start adding it, you can go for it. Okay, back to our slideshow here. So we're going to transition over to methods. I wanted to give you a couple of hints, and one of the things is looking at this example of an interview questionnaire. This is Maha's, and you can see a lot of different kinds of questions. So I wanted to show you, to encourage you to think about different ways of asking questions. You don't have to be just a straightforward question. You can also see that she's given categories. These are otherwise known as constructs. So she probably has been thinking about her research question and what are the different areas she would need to ask about in order to fulfill her research question. She would need to ask about their life experiences, their perceptions of others, their self-concept, right? So she's identified particular areas she needs to ask about and then make sure that there's questions. This is a very systematic way to think about your interview protocol, and I think it is a really great way to do it. All right, now, you can see here that she also has a separate row where she has follow-up questions. So these are kind of probes. And there's these things on the side that say instructions are where she's going to substitute certain words in depending on who she's interviewing. So this is very detailed. Now, one of the things I like about this first question, I wonder if you have been in situations where you experience Islamophobia, is that she then asks, tell me about this experience and then how has this experience affected you? So she's eliciting stories and narrative from the students, which is you're gonna get really rich data when you do that. This question here, how would you describe the people you hang out with at the university? So this is almost like a tour question. So this really it's very open-ended. It can describe all the different kinds of people. And then I love this, what about them makes you feel comfortable? So really, again, because Maha's goal is to really get at the experiences and perceptions of these students, these are excellent questions. Now she's getting into identity. Which identity dilemmas being Muslim and does Western culture pose for you? I did give her a little bit of advice on this question. Students may not entirely understand those words. So you might have to introduce the ideas. Now, I'd really like this one too. If I ask you to describe yourself to me, what would you say? But that's a really excellent question because that, again, is very open-ended. What might they say? Maybe they would not describe themselves as Muslim or particular identity. And in fact, maybe this question should be one of the first ones, because before introducing this idea of, that I'm identifying you as Muslim and Islamophobia is something you would experience, how do you identify yourself? And then I like this too, fill in the blanks, use short descriptives. Because I am Muslim, others expect me to. This makes me feel. This is another very creative kind of question. Same here. Imagine an administrator or faculty's action was prejudice. Who would you go to complain to? Imagine you were president at CSU East Bay. What would you do to make Muslim students feel included, right? So these imagine questions also can provide some very rich data. So this is just a good example. You can be thinking about revising your interview protocol as you look through this. Okay, so I want to talk just again briefly about the kinds of things in your lit review that you want to include in the pilot study. So if you remember, in the pilot study, all you have is bullet points that are your section headings. I want you to keep those section headings. Of course, revise them, move them around to the right order, but bold them so I know exactly what the heading is. Underneath each of those bullet point headings, write a sentence that shows how that section is going to make an argument towards your research question, right? How is it going to contribute to that research question? The argument can do a lot of different things. It can show the relationship between ideas. So it could be something like the relationship between excellent professional development and teachers changing their practice. It can be a typology or general things we understand about this topic. It's not really an argument, but it just could be here's what we understand about this particular thing. It can be the argument about the effectiveness of something. So maybe if someone has a section on culturally relevant pedagogy or on restorative justice practices, it could be an argument about what we know from the literature as to why this is effective, or it could be an argument at the very end for a need for more research. Okay, so we've gone over a little bit about the introduction. We've gone over a little bit about interview protocol. We've gone over a little bit about what you need to write up for your literature review. Now I'm going to give you some advice on your methods. I've been reading through your methods, giving you feedback, and I'm going to give you some general advice. Number one, and I really, I would recommend you pause this video and go make some notes for yourself to do this. You could even then go do it and come back to the video. In your data collection procedures, be very specific about how, where, and when you will collect data. So where do you intend to interview people? How many people? All of those, what exact kind of interview protocol, okay? Be very specific about your sample. You need to state, I will interview 3 Muslim Americans who are college age attending CSU East Bay. 1 is going to be a hijab wearing female, et cetera, right? So really describe, this is the sample. And it could be that you don't end up with that sample because sometimes that happens, but describe the sample you intend to do. You may want to use charts and tables. So for example, district demographics often can be better described in a table. And I also recommend reading the methods of an author you admire to get additional help in thinking about how to write up your methods. So again, remember this is an iterative process. We're always in this process of thinking through, revising, and so forth. So as you revise your methods, use these potential sources to understand how to revise. Your data collection protocol section. This is, sort of where you would describe how you created your protocol, including where you got it and where you got the idea of it. And throughout the methods, including this section, you want to cite. So you want to cite what authors were you reading when you thought about these questions for the protocol. You want to cite what authors helped you understand what kind of sample to do, all right? What methods book talked about the type of protocol. And then of course you want to include the data collection protocol revised, of course, in the appendix. Now all of these, your protocol is always a work in progress. So you'll continue to revise it and of course use it hopefully for your dissertation. So you'll go through process of revising it. I recommend revising it each time you actually do the data collection. Speaking of data collection, you will be starting to collect data in the next couple of weeks. Don't start until I have finished. Don't start until I've approved of your revised method. So I'm giving you feedback on your methods right now. You should revise your methods as soon as you get my feedback. Send it to me and I'll give you a thumbs up. That revised methods needs to have the protocol also revised. So I can take another look at it. And when everything feels pretty good, that means I know exactly who you're interviewing or getting data from. I know exactly when and how you're doing it. And I know exactly what protocol you're using. And we both really like it. Then you will be able to start collecting data. Now, you could start thinking about how to arrange it right now. So you may want to start contacting people that you might interview. You may want to contact a gatekeeper for those folks, right? So you can start thinking about it now before I've approved fully. Just don't do the actual data collection until then. And we're going to finish collecting data around the 3rd week of March. So we've got a little over a month for this process, but I just want to give you a heads up. I mentioned this before, but you also may change your protocol as you go along. This is a pilot study, and one of the big reasons for a pilot study is to actually revise your data collection protocol so that they are in really good shape for your dissertation. To store data confidentially, you may want to assign an identifier like initials, or you may want to, in a survey, for example, ask them to enter, spelled wrong, something like their birth month and date. So you can use different kinds of ways of storing data confidentially. Keep in mind, you will also need to transcribe any data you collect by recording. So just kind of have that in your mind in terms of the end of March, early April. Either you can transcribe it or you can send it to rev.com. They cost $1 a minute and they are really fast. There's also other tools some people use, actually like Google, like they speak it into a speaker and it records for them. So there's other ways to do it a little bit faster than typing it. All right, so that's my advice on methods. I'm going to move into just a couple of other little pieces of advice before closing for this week. One is on citations and plagiarism. Most of you seem like you know this already, but just to make sure we're very clear about the difference between citations and quotes, and this is to help you avoid plagiarism, all right? So you see in green there, the critical legal studies movement aimed to address the effects of race and racism in US jurisprudence. So down at the bottom, you can see a list of what these things are, right? In the green, it should be your own words. That means it's completely your own words. Like you are not looking at someone else's article as you write these words. You have digested it and you are regurgitating it for this purpose, all right? But as soon as the quote begins, now that is exactly someone else's words. And note that the citation, which is in blue, Desir, Gunby, and Dixon, 2004, also has a page number, which you would need to do for a quotation. Now, the next sentence is the person's own words again, all right? The early work of Derek Bell and Ellen Friedman centered on how to move forward with racial reform in the United States. So this is like the person has read Ladson Billings and digested it and thought about it and said, this is what I want to say about what Ladson Billings said, right? And so you have the citation, which is Ladson Billings 2005, and then the reference, which is in purple below, which is a Ladson Billings reference. So just to clarify the language, sometimes, there's so many different words in academia. I just want to clarify the language around each of these pieces. A quotation, right, which is in quotations, the citation, which is in parentheses in the text, and the reference, which is down below. Now, there should be, and I'm going to check on this, a place in Blackboard to upload your pilot study and check for plagiarism before you turn it in using Turnitin. So there should be a try it out kind of Turnitin at the bottom of course materials. All right, that is it for the week. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next week. Please ask me any questions and comments down below on the video, or you can email me.